Okay, Bill Ludwig, a Connecticut native, began life in Woodbridge, Connecticut, and is now a longtime resident of Branford. He founded Hotchkiss Publishing in 2014, which led to a sequence of events guiding him to become interested in labyrinths, and he began looking for them wherever he traveled. Little did he realize that his love of labyrinths would lead him to find the love of his life when he walked one of the few labyrinths along the Camino with a Dutch woman and fell in love. Chasing Labyrinths, Bill's first book, was much more work than he had envisioned, as well as more rewarding. However, he looks forward to chasing more labyrinths in New England and elsewhere. So everyone, welcome Bill.
Okay. Well, hi, I'm Bill Ludwig. Thank you all for dropping in. This is my first live Zoom thing, so bear with me, and my first PowerPoint show, so I'll do the best I can. So we'll start out, the opening slide here shows a picture of the labyrinth that is on the cover of the book, Chasing Labyrinths. It's at the Holy Family in West Hartford. It's a beautiful labyrinth. It's in the middle of about 30 acres, so it's all by itself. One interesting feature is that the stones used for the borders of the walkways were recycled cobblestones from the streets of New York. So there's a little history there. And we'll get to, the opening touched on the love story portion of this, which we will get to as we move along. But I really didn't know a thing about labyrinths until 1996. I was looking for a cover for a book I was doing on a weekly spiritual meditation book called Dear Friend. And I was looking for the cover and I couldn't come up with anything I liked. And I did a search in a photo website, and I put in spiritual path, and up came this wonderful image of this person walking on a labyrinth on a beach, which seemed pretty ideal for me, considering my author's name was Sandy Beach. So I said this was a no-brainer. And so my designer obviously agreed, and it made this fantastic cover. But it got me wondering, so how is a labyrinth a spiritual path, and how is it different from a maze? And so I started to do some online poking around and started to learn a little bit about labyrinths. And so one of the things that people say, the difference between a labyrinth and a maze, is that mazes, which are sort of puzzles, the maze's purpose is to keep you from getting to the center. Whereas a labyrinth, which only has one continuous pathway, a unicursal labyrinth, labyrinth helps you find your center. And so it's a very different use and a very different pattern. So when you see the corn mazes out there in the fall, it is not, it's a labyrinth, but it's a maze labyrinth, not a unicursal labyrinth. So it's just out there to trick you. It's not out there to help you. So concurrently, at the same time that I discovered labyrinths, I started following, a friend had sent me a blog of a gentleman, the guy there to the left in plaid, Steve. He was walking the Camino de Santiago, which I knew nothing about. But the blog was forwarded to me, and it kept coming as he was going across Spain. And by the time he got through, he was tugging at my soul. And so I wanted to meet Steve, and he lives in Litchfield. So when he came back, we met for lunch one day. And he took me over after lunch to this retreat center that's in Litchfield to meet Father Bill, who's just a wonderful, wonderful man. And the retreat center there is Lourdes of Litchfield. And this is, behind us is a reproduction of the Grotto of Lourdes. And anyway, so this was the beginning of really a parallel journey, a parallel, interest in, walking meditation, be it via a labyrinth or via the Camino. So in my research of digging around for trying to find labyrinths, I discovered that there's an online database called the Worldwide Labyrinth Locator. And you can find labyrinths all over the world with this. And I discovered that there was one in Woodbridge at the First Church of Christ. And I was born in Woodbridge, so that's where I grew up. And so, and I can't really tell you how this came about. I don't remember if it was really that deliberate, but it was on January 1st of 2017 that I walked my first labyrinth at the First Church of Christ, where I was born. And so a lot of firsts happened that day, and it was really, it got me very interested in wanting to find more of them. And so when I started to travel, I'd look around and I'd look on this site and see if I could find one in whatever state I happened to be in. So I liked the quest of finding them as well as walking them. So also I became the other quest is I decided to, in fact, go walk on the Camino to Santiago. So as Branford residents, you'll appreciate the fact that I was able to, because we have this wonderful train station not far from where I live, I was able to begin my Camino at my front door. So I walked to the train station and set off to do this pilgrimage walk across Spain. You know, and again, it's I know if I have this someplace else, but this moving meditation, be it walking in a straight line, you know, running, swimming, or walking a labyrinth, just the moving meditation had become attractive to me. So because I've been introduced to the Camino and the coincidence of meeting this priest and friend in Litchfield at the Lourdes shrine there, I decided I would begin my pilgrimage on the Camino at Lourdes in France. So this is the cathedral, and on the right-hand picture, you can see the actual grotto where Bernadette had her interactions with Mary. And it was a wonderful place to begin the Camino because I walked for a week in the Pyrenees, in the foothills of the Pyrenees, before I took a left and crossed the Pyrenees and walked across Spain. But this isn't entirely about the Camino. We'll get back to labyrinths. So along with you know, this starting to follow spiritual paths, and is that there's a sense of being guided, and that's what in labyrinths certainly guide you on your path and reinforce the fact that you're on a path that is guided if you trust your path. And this Camino has all these little signs guiding you I walked for 1,000 kilometers across, and you can almost do it without a map. You know, you just follow these little arrows and scallop shells, and it was just a remarkable thing that here I had 1,300,000 steps I had never been on, but you know, I never got lost. You know, I never got lost. And so here's just a bit of crossing Spain, and but I was only halfway across. Part of looking for part of the labyrinth thing that comes into this is twofold. One, I knew I did a little research trying to find out where I would find labyrinths along the Camino, and I discovered there were very few. And at this point, I'd been 500 kilometers without seeing a labyrinth. And it was on one day that I was walking along, and I came across this giant, this thing, it must be 100 feet in diameter. It's a huge spiral labyrinth. I call them spontaneous labyrinths because people just create these. There's one on the beach in Hammonasset, which is in the book, and which I'll have a slide of later. And people just continue to add stones and until they run out of room. And so this one has a lot of room. So this was quite large. And that morning I happened to start walking with a woman from the Netherlands, Charlotte, and we came across this labyrinth, and I said, I'm sorry, but I need to stop and walk this, even though it was a big detour of a half an hour of walking around in circles in the middle of a very linear walk. But she agreed to do it, and so she went ahead, and we walked around and around in silence, and got to the center. She turned around and opened her arms. I walked into them, and it was like our souls collided. It was quite amazing. I didn't even know I was interested, and all of a sudden I'm going, what just happened? So anyway, we walked together for only 2 days before she had to return to the Netherlands. We got to Burgos, and she abandoned me, and I had 500 kilometers to continue walking, wondering what on earth had just happened. So I continued on, and November 1st, 2017, completed. I arrived in Santiago de Compostela, and when you get there, they give you a little certificate saying that you're a pilgrim and all your sins are forgiven. And anyway, it's a life-changing, remarkable undertaking. I'm so glad I did it, and I can't wait till this pandemic is all over and I can go back and walk the same or another Camino route. But back to Labyrinths and how Chasing Labyrinths came about. And the Chasing Labyrinths came about because going off to walk the Camino, I spent almost most of the year getting ready, planning, exercising, hiking, and then I was gone for 10 weeks. I was 7 weeks walking and a few other weeks still in Europe. And I knew that when I returned home, there was going to be a huge void, and I wanted to avoid falling into some hole of depression after this big event of walking the Camino. So before I left, I promised myself that when I came back, I would work on a book of guidebook to Labyrinths of Connecticut and Rhode Island, and which was a big commitment for me. I've been in publishing since 1969 in one form or another, most of it academic publishing, but I had never written a thing in my life. And, so this was a big change for me in getting out of my comfort zone. And but it was fun. The Chasing Labyrinth part, the going around Connecticut, driving around to all these different places, meeting different people, and learning how to fly a drone without crashing, and how to take decent pictures. But there's this illustrations in the book, in the front of the book, and it lists 50 labyrinths in Connecticut. There's an additional 14 labyrinths in Rhode Island, also in the book. So the map is kind of useful it's not deadly accurate, but it gives you an idea that if you're going to be in Southwest Connecticut or Northeast Connecticut, running an errand or visiting, you might want to check out a labyrinth that's nearby. Or if you're looking just for a day trip, it's a great way to come up with a day trip. And with the COVID business, it's a good social distancing thing to do, in that most of the labyrinths are outside. They're rarely crowded unless they happen to be having an event, which isn't happening very often in this time of COVID. So here's, there's so many different designs. This design is pretty much copied from the classic labyrinth that's in Chartres, France, in the cathedral there in stone on the floor, 800-year-old design. And this is at St. John's Episcopal in Waterbury. It's a lovely spot. It's downtown. It's a real surprise. It's downtown Waterbury. You can park right on the street, and you can look and see it right there, and just walk over and walk it. It's always open, always available, at least during daytime hours. Then I mentioned before that there's a labyrinth on the beach at Hammonasset, and this is it. It's as again I said, spontaneous labyrinth. Nobody knows who started it. People just have added stones to it over the years. It's been there for, as far as I can find out, maybe 5 years, 6 years. And it's gotten bigger every year. It's a sort of run out of real estate. So people have now been leaving stones in the center. So there's a pile of stones in the center. And it gets rearranged with, winter storms. And I was there, this picture was taken a few years ago, but I was there recently, and people have kept it in it was in beautiful shape this year. So to get there, you go all the way down to the end of Meg's Point, park in the last parking lot, and follow the pathway east, and you'll go across this shell beach, and voila, this lovely spiral labyrinth. Budget a little time because it actually is bigger than it looks, and if you walk it both ways, it's going to take you a good half an hour probably. And so it's a beautiful, beautiful spot there. So here we skip by. Here's one nearby in East Haven. It's not always open. You have to check. It's a One World Wellness Center. They do some events. She has it open some of the time. It's good to call ahead. They also have a coffee shop there, and it's a nice place to stop in. This is a unique design in that they utilized the frame of this is the foundation of a 100-year-old barn. The property had once been a farm, and so they utilized the space, and they've created a walkway and it's littered with all kinds of different little artifacts. So it's a fascinating walk of discovery of just things that they've placed in the labyrinth along the path. And then it finishes not at the middle, it finishes at the back end where they have a fire pit. They do some events there, and then you can walk back from the fire pit as though it were in the center. This is a wonderful labyrinth at Wisdom House in Litchfield, another retreat center. And this was built in 1996, which gives it the distinction of being the oldest permanent outside labyrinth in Connecticut. And that may seem hard to believe, but labyrinths have had a real renaissance since the 90s. And just in putting the book together, I did a little research, and I looked and discovered that in 1998, there were only 100 labyrinths listed in this online database. And today there are over 4,400 in the United States alone. And so they've been growing, rapidly. They become, and this includes labyrinths that aren't permanent. Some of the labyrinths listed in this online database are canvas portable labyrinths and things like that people use bring out just for events. But this is and the other thing about the Wisdom House Labyrinth is it spawned and inspired quite a few, including that one in Woodbridge that was my first labyrinth, is exactly the same pattern. So why do we walk labyrinths? And some of the benefits of labyrinths is a reminder to trust that you're on your path. I often use the labyrinth just to do that. Just when I start getting in a little doubt of where I'm going, what I'm doing, I find that walking the labyrinth, reminds me that there are lots of twists and turns, but it's my path, and just trust it. Mindfulness, it's a good meditation. That labyrinth is a wonderful tool as opposed to just going out for a walk, in that you have to pay attention to the curves. You have to pay attention to the pathway. And while you're focusing on the pathway, you tend to let go of the extraneous thoughts and pressures and whatnot that you have weighing you down. And there's sort of, it's a reminder about acceptance as well. You can start walking a labyrinth, and if you want, you can certainly walk right to the center and skip over all the lines, but that's not your path. If you do that, you're fighting your path. You're fighting with your path, or if you think of it as a maze that's in 3 dimensions, you're bumping into walls, And so rather than bump into walls, you accept your path, and makes life a lot more comfortable. And then patience. You know, you're going to get to the center after you take all the steps, and that's it. And I certainly learned patience on my labyrinth, my Camino labyrinth. You know, it's just one step at a time. So there's lots of different ways to look at and utilize labyrinths. Here's a lovely one, and certainly the most, probably the most well-known in Rhode Island, and this is on Block Island. It's out at the end of, it's out on off of Corn Neck Road. It's a couple of miles out of town, so you may want to take a bicycle or a taxi or a long walk. But it's a beautiful spot with beautiful views all around the island. There's a little meditation garden over to one side, and there's a book in a little box there that you can leave little journal notes, you know, about what you think of what you thought of your experience there. Barbara McDougall, who's about 95, who built this labyrinth, collected some of those, and here's you can't really see it very well in the reflection, but she actually published a book, Letters from the Labyrinth, which were taken from that journal. It's, I believe, out of print, but you might be able to find a used copy on Amazon. Again, Barbara McDougall, Letters from the Labyrinth. And so it's a lovely spot. And this is one of the most popular. Barbara tells me that somewhere in season, 50 to 75 people a day walk this labyrinth, which is really quite something. So, and let's see if I can do this differently. No, that's not working. Not all labyrinths are outside. Some of them are inside. This is a beautiful Chart-styled labyrinth at Asylum Hill in Hartford. And there are a few listed in the book. With these indoor labyrinths, you need to call in advance to make sure there's not an event going on, make sure they're not covered with chairs and desks or something else. There's one in Washington that the room is also used as a kindergarten, so you need to check and make sure it's actually available to walk. But they're fun to discover, and there are a few listed in the book. This is quite the opposite. This is actually one of my favorite styles of labyrinths, and there are 3 or 4 like this in the book, scattered around the state, that are just built incorporating the woodland as part of it. This is in Higganum, St. James Church. It's hard to find. You have to follow the directions in the book. It's behind the parish house and in the woods. You have to take a little walk in. But it's a lovely, lovely labyrinth to walk. It was, I have to say, quite a challenge to photograph with my drone flying around in between all the limbs of the trees without crashing. So it was a bit of a challenge, but I was actually pretty pleased that this came out with a fairly decent picture and I didn't crash. So there's also, while we're on that, just down the street in Killingworth is at the Congregational Church. There is a very similar labyrinth that's lovely as well behind the church. And it's behind there are no signs for it, but it's behind their meditation garden, memorial garden. So they can be made out of all kinds of things. And here's a really unique labyrinth. And this is built new every fall by the woman who's the art director at the Norwalk Community College. And she builds a different design every year, and she builds it with goose feathers. And there's a completed labyrinth. This year was just a spiral. I helped for about an hour on it. And you take a screwdriver, make a hole, stick in the goose feather, stuck it in and make sure it stays. The and it says there no geese were injured. She has discovered a cemetery. I don't know where, but she's discovered a cemetery that a flock of geese come to every spring and molt. And she runs around and collects their feathers and to build the labyrinth. And if that wasn't enough, she then has to separate them all into left wing and right wing so that they curve in the right, all in the same direction within their circle. So quite an undertaking. It stays there, she tells me, throughout the winter and throughout the summer, and it only goes away at the end of the summer when they finally mow the. This is on a little hilltop, and they only mow it in the fall. And then after that's mowed, she does it again. So you may want to check first, but if you're in the area, it's definitely worth having a look at. So all sizes and shapes. Here's a fairly new, actually, it was a brand new labyrinth when I was running around taking pictures for the book, and it wasn't listed anywhere. And one of the other labyrinths in Rhode Island, people told me about it. And this is Grace Episcopal Church. They put a new addition on the church, and they wanted to create a courtyard. It was a multi-purpose courtyard. And they decided to incorporate a labyrinth in the stone in the courtyard. And I'm told that since I took the picture, they've gone back and darkened some of the lines with some stain to make it stand out a little bit better. But their labyrinths, again, they can be in all sizes and shapes. They can be square, round, amoeba shaped. There's no rules to the shape they can be, let alone the pattern. So here's my first attempt at making a labyrinth. Not long after I walked that labyrinth in Woodbridge, we had a snowstorm. So I said, oh, let me build a labyrinth in my backyard. So I went out and started clomping around, knowing no idea what to do and where to start or how to do it. But I just clomped around until I had what I thought looked a little bit like a labyrinth. Looks a little like a drunken labyrinth. But my neighbor across the street later commented that she'd seen me out there wondering or she thought I'd gone nuts. I was out there for an hour or so, stomping and going nowhere from her perspective across the street. But she did come over, and she was my first person to walk a labyrinth that I created. So that was my first. So, and here's my second labyrinth. This is the Branford Labyrinth. And this is over, some of you may be familiar with it. It's on the Branford Greenway Trail, right across from Chet's Pond. It's a beautiful, beautiful spot. You know, I went to approach the town with it last year in the spring, just after the Greenway Trail was paved. It was purely coincidence. And I asked the first selectman, Jamie, if he'd be interested, and he was all for it. He was all on board. They had a few dollars left over from their budget for the Greenway Trail. So he was more than happy to let the town crew do the site work. There was already a small clearing there that had been partially paved with road millings. And I said, can you make it a little bit bigger? And they said they could. And then we went to the Stony Creek Quarry and asked if they'd donate materials, and they said we could have whatever we wanted. So all that material that you see there is Stony Creek process, which is like Stony Creek gravel, all made out of the pink gravel. So that was rolled out, and a young friend of mine, Anthony Peck, came over and helped me and to do the layout. I can't tell you, it took me longer to think of how to do this than it took to do it. I spent a long time scratching my head and rigging up a device to paint the lines. But in a short, 3.5 hours, we got the lines all put down and sat back and took this picture. And I can't tell you how pleased I was. It came out much different and much nicer than I expected. I then went home and looked online and discovered that somebody had a patent, had a copyright on that design, and it's called the Peace Labyrinth. And so I had to give her credit for having the design. But so this is the finished labyrinth with Chet's Pond across the way. It's just a beautiful spot. It's a third of a mile walk from either Tabor Road or from Pine Orchard Road. The labyrinth itself is a round trip is a third of a mile. It's 1,100 feet one way. The pathways, because the Greenway Trail was designed and built to be handicapped accessible, I made the pathways for the labyrinth 4 feet wide so that it's handicapped accessible. It also makes it very nice for doing events so that people can be walking in at the same time that people are walking out. Again, all the material, all the stone was donated by the Stony Creek Quarry. The white at the corners are seashells that was donated by the King family of the lobster fame in Branford. Some of you may know DJ King and his wife. And and then there are a couple of finished pieces that the quarry also was, just very generous in donating. I wanted a finishing piece in the center, and this is a 6-foot circle of Stony Creek granite with infinity engraved, just as a reminder that life has, infinite possibilities, and we don't know what they are. And this piece, threshold piece that they made up for me with the saying, "Say yes to the universe," I really believe is how all this has happened. That's how I ended up on the Camino, how I ended up creating a book, how I ended up creating this labyrinth. All things I never thought I would ever do. And I just said yes. And I didn't worry about whether I could or should or anything else, and just moved forward. And it's been amazing what's happened in that time. So there's the Branford Labyrinth, and not to be outdone, Guilford is in the process of building a labyrinth at the Congregational Church. And this is they couldn't wait to actually have the thing built. So the gentleman there took it upon himself to paint the lines of the labyrinth. And every week after the lawn's cut, he repaints the lines. So if you want to walk a labyrinth and you're in Guilford, check this out. It's if you're facing the Congregational Church, it's off to the right of their memorial garden. And they're in the process of getting quotes and talking to people about building a permanent version, and perhaps needing to raise some funds for that too. I'm not sure, but it was nice to discover this one's not in the book. I'd only just learned about it. And so back to my Camino and labyrinth and the twists and turns. And so last year I took Charlotte, and we went and visited Paris and took a side trip to Chartres and walked the labyrinth in the cathedral. And when we got to the center of the labyrinth, it was my turn, and I turned around and proposed. And she said yes, which was quite wonderful. But as labyrinths go, there's more to that story, which I'll get back to. So people talk about, how do you walk a labyrinth? There's no right or wrong way to walk a labyrinth, but a very common instruction that's given are the 3 R's that, that will maybe at the center, before you start, sometimes you may want to set an intention, something you're trying to deal with, thoughts you're trying to get rid of, trying to receive, anything. You may walk with a purpose, or you may not, but on the way in, you release, your pressures, thoughts, the busyness in your mind, and hopefully the labyrinth will help you focus and let those thoughts, extraneous thoughts, leave. In the center, perhaps you receive inspiration, an idea, a thought, and you can pause. Most people pause in the center, depending on the labyrinth and depending on how you are. Some people like to, while they're at the center, take a little moment of time and face the 4 cardinal directions, north, south, east, west. In the Chartres labyrinth, there are rose petals, and some people step into each petal and say a little prayer on their way around. And then on the way out, you can reflect on what you received in the center. There are other ways of walking the labyrinth. One of the unique things about the Peace Labyrinth, as with some others, that the design of the Peace Labyrinth with 7 circuits and the number of turns, the turns match the stations of the cross. And so some people can use that to pause at a turn and do whatever you do at a station of the cross. And some people just stop and say a prayer or whatever you care to. Labyrinths are used in witchcraft, Wicca. Other rituals are done around labyrinths. There's no one history of labyrinths. Every society, every continent has its own labyrinth history. And it's just because I think partially because circles are such a common symbol for life and life's journey that they grew in literally every continent. They said you can make them out of different things. This is a leather finger labyrinth that I've created. If you have an interest, contact me. I've got a few that I've made. And it's a nice thing to do. A woman in town bought quite a few, I think 10 from me, to give out to rehabilitation centers, so that people that aren't mobile, can sit and do a little finger labyrinth and have their own little meditation. And I just thought that was just a beautiful use for them. So there's so many different ways you can go with this. Here's my plug. Hotchkiss Publishing, Amazon, books available, my phone number. I'll end the love story with the love story took an unexpected turn in the labyrinth of life this week, and we're no longer engaged. I'm sorry to report, but life goes on. We'll remain friends and remain in contact, and see where life's path leads us next. But it's been a wonderful journey, and I wouldn't do any of it over again. And I now have this wonderful book. So that's it from me. If anyone has any questions, somebody can help me figure out how to find it.
I can moderate the chat. If anybody has any questions, you can just type them in the chat, and I'll read them to Bill.
Audio is okay with me.
Bill?
We could do.
Yeah.
Bill?
Yeah. Hi, Peter.
Peter. Very, very interesting. Marianne and I, my wife, are creating a meditation center. We're calling it the Pomfret Peace Center up in Pomfret, Connecticut. And we've been going for several years now to an ashram in India and studying with a teacher there, and finding, frankly, many of the things that you find walking in a labyrinth or taking your Camino walk. One of the things we'd like to do at the property is actually create a labyrinth. So I'd like to kind of talk to you probably offline about that and some ideas on concepts that we might be able to use in a rather natural setting up there.
Would be happy to do that anytime.
Is that your phone number on the screen?
Yep. I think you probably have it anyway.
I may have it, but yeah. Okay.
Or my email. My email's bill@hotchkisspublishing.com.
Great.
Someone has a question. They want to know, Bill, if you've been to the labyrinth at Mercy Center in Madison.
Yes, I have. Yes, I've walked it. It's a beautiful labyrinth. I'm surprised I didn't put the picture in here. It's a lovely, lovely labyrinth. It's a difficult labyrinth to walk because it's a three-dimensional labyrinth. It has shrubs creating the outline of the pathway, and and each year the shrubs get a little bigger, and so they crowd out where you're actually supposed to walk, and so you have there's a board with instructions on how to walk that labyrinth, and to follow the gravel and not the brick. There's brick that people get lost walking that labyrinth so often because they follow the wrong thing. And so if you follow the gravel, it's a nice walk, and it's a beautiful, beautiful spot. And it's a wonderful place to go meditate. And if you pay attention to the instructions, it's a lovely labyrinth to walk.
I have been to the retreat center and the labyrinth on the cover of your book.
Oh, lovely.
And that's a beautiful place too. The whole retreat center, but their labyrinth is with the circle in the middle.
Yeah.
It's
a very special, very unique place.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I forgot to mention again, for people in Branford or Branford area that don't know, I try to do a walk once a month at the Branford Labyrinth, and we do a candlelight walk near the full moon. I've discovered that if I do it the day before the full moon, the moon will be up. Well, it comes up a little earlier, so you don't have to stay till 10 o'clock at night to actually be walking the labyrinth in the moonlight. But we use little battery candles, and we light the pathway starting from the Tabor parking lot all the way down to the labyrinth, and then we put candles throughout the labyrinth. And it's a really special thing. People seem to be enjoying it a lot. We do it not as a set time event to respect social distancing. We do it over a couple of hours. So the next one will be whatever the day before the full moon is. And it'll probably be 7 to 9. There's a Facebook page for the Branford Labyrinth on the Greenway Trail. Or you can find me on Facebook. And I publish when these things, when it's going to happen. It'll probably be 7 to 9 on this. Again, I don't have a calendar in front of me, on whatever the day before the full moon this month. And so anybody's welcome. There's no charge. I'm there and answer questions, and I usually happen to have a book available if anyone wants to buy it. So.
So the full moon is October 1.
Okay, so the day before. So that's the 30th or 31st of this month?
Wednesday the 30th.
30th. So September 30th is the next moonlight candlelight walk. And it'll probably be, I'm sure it'll be 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. So, and I look forward to seeing each and every one of you there. And if not, if you're in the area, and if you haven't been down to the Greenway Trail and the Labyrinth in Chet's Pond, please go down. It's a beautiful spot. It's a wonderful asset for the town. The town is just wonderful that they've created this trail, that it's accessible. I've seen people in wheelchairs, kids. I've seen the guy who runs down there with his wife who's blind. It's a safe, wonderful place to be. And if you want to walk the labyrinth, that's there too. But it's just a beautiful, beautiful spot. And through this pandemic, a lot of people have been out walking, and a lot of people have been utilizing this trail, period. So if you're in the area, I highly recommend, checking it out. It's a lovely asset. We're blessed in this town to have that, and a wonderful Blackstone library too.
Well, thank you very much. This was a nice presentation.
Oh, well, thank you.
So if anybody has any other questions, I'm sure they can get in touch with you, right, Bill?
That's right. Please feel free to call, or again, my email's bill@hotchkisspublishing.com, or I'm all over Facebook, either personally or Hotchkiss Publishing or Branford Labyrinth. So.
Well, you're talking about the Blackstone Library. Friends of a Blackstone Library, tomorrow will be the last day for our mini book sale.
Oh, okay, good.
So
That's wonderful.
shopping coming out will be nice.
Yeah.
It's on the School Ground Road, number 59. School Ground Road behind the Cattle Pot area.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
All right.
Well, thank
Very
you. Thank you
interesting,
all.
Bill.
Thank you,
Very-
Bill. It
very
was a great
informative.
talk.
Thank you, Bill.
Very-
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Have a
you.
great weekend, everybody.
Thank you very
See
much.
you
Very
on the
much.
path.
Thanks.
See you on the
Bye-bye.
path.
Look forward to
Take
it.
care.
Okay.
Thank you.